She was born in the wild heart of Montana, yet Hollywood transformed her into an Egyptian goddess. She was fired for daring to think for herself, praised by presidents for her courage, and banned by fascists who feared her influence. But through it all, she refused to play by Hollywood's rules. This wasn't just another starlet of the silver screen, this was Myrna Adele Williams, born on August 2, 1905, in Helena, Montana, a woman whose life began in scandal and only grew more extraordinary. Her father was a respected real estate man and a state legislator, a figure of stature in their small Montana town. But her mother, a trained pianist with restless ambitions, had other dreams. She longed for escape, away from Helena's rigid social rules and dusty frontier politics. When tragedy struck at just 13, her father falling to the flu while traveling, the family was shattered. Her mother seized the moment to break free, gathering Myrna and her younger brother and setting their sights on Los Angeles. It wasn't for schools or family ties, it was for opportunity, for freedom. They settled in Baldwin Hills, where money was scarce and every penny mattered. Myrna was quiet, watchful, always absorbing the world around her. She filled her time with books, sketches, and dance, slowly shaping the artistry that would define her. She found a home in local theater groups and trained in ballet, determined to push past the limits of her circumstances. And while still a student, she stepped into the grandeur of Grauman's Egyptian theater, not with lines to speak, but as a silent, still dancer draped in elaborate Egyptian costume, already hinting at the stardom that awaited her. She stood on pedestals before the films began, her arms stretched out, motionless, a living statue in the theater. At just 18, a photographer captured her image and handed it to a silent film casting director. That single photograph changed everything. She claimed she had acting experience, though she didn't, and her lie opened the door. In the beginning, her parts were small, background figures, maids, servants, nameless extras who filled the frame. For years, she never spoke a single word on camera. Hollywood didn't see a leading lady. They saw something different. Her sharp cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes branded her as exotic, a label that would cling to her across more than a dozen films. She was cast as a gypsy, a Chinese mistress, a native princess, an Egyptian dancer, even villainous seductresses painted in false brown face. None of it reflected who she truly was. In reality, she was of Welsh and Scottish descent. The roles were stereotypes, shallow and repetitive. But she took them, because that was all Hollywood would give. By 1927, she had already appeared in nearly 30 films. Still no fame, no spotlight, no name on the marquee, just a trail of characters she didn't choose and identities she couldn't control. Yet behind the silence, she was watching, absorbing, and learning. She might not have spoken on screen, but she was quietly preparing for the moment she would. Myrna Loy was in Hollywood, and she was paying close attention, quietly studying every move as she went from background to breakout. By the late 1920s, her face seemed to be everywhere. She couldn't afford to turn down roles. With no agent, no protection, and no real power in the system, survival meant saying yes. In 1 year alone, she appeared in 13 films. Most were silent, most were forgettable, but for her, screen time mattered more than scripts. Every appearance was another step forward. In 1927, she landed a role in Across the Pacific, cast as a seductive spy. The part was thin, but her presence couldn't be ignored. That same year she played a vamp in the heart of Maryland and a native girl in The Jazz Singer. Though the film is remembered today mostly for Al Jolson's infamous blackface performance, Myrna had a single line, barely lit, almost lost in the shadows. But she was there. It was a start. By 1929, she finally earned her first on-screen credit. Yet with that milestone came a new challenge. Sound had arrived. Hollywood was panicking as silent stars stumbled under the weight of microphones and dialogue. Many careers ended overnight. But Myrna wasn't one of them. Her voice, low, calm, and steady, slipped into the new era with ease, proving she had more than just a striking face. She had the presence, and now, the voice to carry her further. Her voice carried a smooth rhythm and a clean delivery, nothing shrill, nothing forced. Yet even with that advantage, the roles stayed the same. In the early 1930s, she was still being cast as the exotic beauty. In The Desert Song, she wore the veil once again. That same year, she appeared in The Black Watch, The Truth About Youth, and Bride of the Regiment, always boxed in by typecasting. One critic even dismissed her as a reliable foreigner. But behind the scenes, Myrna Loy was changing. She began building quiet alliances, with script supervisors, editors, makeup artists, anyone who could teach her how the machine of Hollywood really worked. She studied the craft from the inside out, how lighting could shape a face, how framing could transform a performance. She wasn't just surviving, she was preparing. Then came The Animal Kingdom in 1932. The film wasn't a major success, but for Myrna it was a turning point. She played a modern woman, sharp, stylish, and grounded. No heavy accent, no wig, no fabricated nationality. For the first time, audiences saw her without disguise, and producers finally noticed. That same year, she starred in Love Me Tonight opposite Maurice Chevalier, not as a seductress or a danger, but as a witty French aristocrat, confident, funny, and in control. And then, in 1934, came The Thin Man. In a single film, everything changed. When Myrna Loy was cast as Nora Charles in The Thin Man, it wasn't supposed to be her breakthrough. MGM designed the story around the detective, Nick Charles, expecting him to carry the film. But from the very first scene, Loy stole it. She played Nora with sharp wit, effortless timing, and a quiet authority that commanded the screen. She wasn't just the detective's wife, she was his equal. With martinis in hand, quick banter on her lips, and a glimmer of mischief in her eyes, she cracked jokes, challenged suspects, and lit up every frame without ever needing to raise her voice. Comedy had never been her territory before, but director W.S. Van Dyke saw something in her and took a risk. Known for his fast and loose style, often finishing scenes in a single take, Van Dyke's approach brought out something natural in Loy. There was no forced rehearsal, no polished routine. Her chemistry with co-star William Powell simply appeared, alive and electric from the start. Together, they created magic the studio never anticipated. MGM hadn't expected much from The Thin Man. It was a B-picture with a modest budget, a small gamble in a crowded market. But when it hit theaters, it exploded. Audiences fell in love with the playful couple who solved murders between cocktails and flirted like teenagers. Critics raved, and in an instant, Loy was transformed. By the end of 1934, she was no longer the actress buried in foreign stereotypes. She was Nora Charles, stylish, witty, unforgettable, and she had finally become something Hollywood rarely allowed, an icon in her own right. She was proof that a woman in film could be smart, funny, and effortlessly desirable without hiding behind costumes or seduction plots. With nothing more than sharp writing and sharper delivery, Myrna Loy redefined the leading lady. MGM saw the magic instantly and rushed to pair her with William Powell again and again. Over the next 13 years, they made 5 Thin Man sequels, each fueled by the undeniable chemistry of their on-screen marriage. Off-screen, they were never a couple, but their dynamic was so alive, so magnetic, that fans constantly wondered if the romance was real. But behind the glamour, Loy was fighting quiet battles with the studio. Fame hadn't made her obedient, it had sharpened her resolve. MGM wanted quick profits, pushing her into shallow roles after the success of The Thin Man. Loy refused. If a character lacked dignity, wit, or depth, she turned it down. By 1937, her resistance enraged executives, and the studio suspended her without pay. Yet Loy didn't crack under pressure. She didn't stage a scandal or beg for attention. Instead, she walked away, calm, unbothered, and entirely on her own terms. While MGM fumed, she dedicated her time to volunteering with the Red Cross. Fans were stunned, reporters were baffled, but Loy never explained herself. She didn't need to. In silence, she proved she was bigger than Hollywood's games, and that quiet defiance became her greatest power. Within a few months, MGM returned with a more favorable offer. They provided her with greater control, more influence over scripts, and the assurance of improved roles. She made her comeback on her own terms, starring in Parnell alongside Clark Gable in A Double Wedding with Powell. The message was unmistakable: she was not disposable. Even while bound by contract, she stood her ground against being treated like an object. At that time, studios essentially owned their actors, dictating their public appearances, interviews, and even their romantic entanglements. Loy firmly rejected arranged dates, staged photo opportunities, and fabricated scandals. She refused to pose for pin-up shots or leak stories to gossip columns. She never engaged in the game. While she kept her political views discreet, they were resolute. She identified as a Roosevelt Democrat in a predominantly Republican environment. She made donations quietly, spoke with caution, and never leveraged her career for sensational headlines. She played the game wisely, but never played it safe. Other actresses took note. Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, and Barbara Stanwyck all commended Loy's professionalism. She wasn't ostentatious. She wasn't embroiled in scandal. Yet, she achieved her goals without severing ties. Banned by Hitler himself in the late 1930s, Loy was more than just a film star, she posed a challenge to dictators. While many Hollywood actors remained silent on global issues, Loy was vocal. In interviews and fundraising events, she openly criticized Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. She labeled fascism as a danger to civilization and cautioned that Hollywood had a duty to speak out, a message that did not go unnoticed. In 1938, the Nazi government officially prohibited all of Maui's films in Germany. No Thin Man, no Test Pilot, no Lie Lady, her image was removed from posters, and her name was blacklisted. The justification? She was deemed too outspoken. The German media branded her a negative influence. Loy was unfazed, she took it as a badge of honor. She intensified her efforts. During World War II, Loy declined roles that she believed undermined the war effort or American morale. Rather than portray on-screen heroes, she dedicated herself to real-world service, refusing to make films while troops were sacrificing their lives overseas. From 1942 to 1945, she was absent from the silver screen. While other stars were busy on soundstages, Loy dedicated her time to visiting hospitals, writing letters to soldiers, and making appearances at military bases, not as a character, but as her true self. She leveraged her fame not for publicity or personal gain, but solely to offer assistance. Hollywood held a quiet respect for her actions, even if they didn't translate into box office success. During the war years, MGM attempted to entice her back with light-hearted comedies and romantic scripts. She firmly declined, stating, "No, the work could wait." She wasn't aiming to be a symbol, she simply couldn't bring herself to act while real lives were at stake. That was her perspective. Years later, she remarked, "You couldn't be neutral. You were either against Hitler or you were for him." She also made her way to Washington. After the war, while most stars flocked back to Hollywood, Maui took her time. She had other commitments in Washington. In 1946, President Truman appointed her to the U.S. National Commission for UNESCO, a role typically reserved for scholars or diplomats, not actors. But Loy was more than just a pretty face. She had been actively involved in global aid and educational initiatives throughout the war. Now, she had a voice in important discussions. She wasn't there for photo opportunities, she participated in genuine meetings, delivered speeches, and drafted memos. In one memo to the White House, she cautioned that cultural recovery was just as vital as economic assistance. Her priorities included global literacy, women's education, and post-war reconstruction. This was a groundbreaking path for a Hollywood actress. Journalists were unsure how to respond. She donned tailored suits instead of glamorous gowns. She bypassed red carpets and put in long hours without media attention. One newspaper commented, "Loy is behaving like a true public servant." And she was. In 1948, she became a member of the National Committee Against Discrimination in Housing, one of the earliest national civil rights organizations focused on combating housing segregation. At that time, this stance was not only unpopular but also perilous. Yet, Loy stood her ground. She delivered speeches nationwide, denouncing redlining as a moral failure and urging Congress to take action. Additionally, she held private meetings with civil rights leaders, offering her name, funding, and platform, while ensuring the focus remained off herself. Back in Hollywood, people wondered if she had retired from acting. She hadn't. She simply wasn't finished with her efforts to help. She skillfully balanced both realms, never leveraging her activism to promote her films. She shunned the limelight. While other celebrities pursued magazine covers and gossip columns, she maintained her composure and control. She refrained from posing for pin-up photos. She only participated in interviews when she had something meaningful to share. And she never fabricated relationships to boost ticket sales. Studios despised this approach. In the 1930s and 40s, studio PR teams constructed entire careers based on public personas. They paired stars for publicity, leaked dating rumors, and orchestrated photo shoots to present actors as more all-American or glamorous. Loy rejected all of it. She never found herself embroiled in a scandal. Not once. There were no leaked affairs, no drunken altercations, no conflicts with co-stars. However, this didn't imply she was dull. It simply meant she kept the public at a distance. And the public was eager to get closer. She was recognized for her politeness coupled with directness. She responded to inquiries with concise, pointed answers. When questioned about her ability to avoid scandal, she remarked, "I mind my own business and other people's when it matters." She kept her personal life largely off the record. No tours of her residence, no anecdotes about her childhood pets. Her image remained pristine because she protected it fiercely. Even after marrying 4 times, she didn't allow the studios to exploit it. Each marriage concluded quietly, devoid of headlines or drama. If reporters inquired, she swiftly shut it down. This only heightened her allure. Fans projected their fantasies onto her, envisioning her as Nora Charles, witty, playful, and deeply in love. However, Loy never confirmed or denied anything. She allowed them to speculate. For marriages, no regrets. She tied the knot 4 times. None of those unions endured. She didn't conceal it. Nor did she linger on it. Her first marriage took place in 1936 to producer Arthur Hornblow Jr. On paper, they appeared to be a power couple. In reality, it was frigid. They clashed over finances, Lee's career, and the amount of space they required. After 7 years, she left quietly. Her second husband was John Hers Jr., heir to the yellow cab fortune. They wed in 1942, but it lasted less than 2 years. He desired a wife who would stay at home. She was not that woman. Next came her third husband, screenwriter Gene Markey. That marriage barely lasted a year. She later remarked, "I married too often because I enjoyed being in love. I divorced because I also enjoyed being alone." Her final marriage was to UN diplomat Howland Sargent. It appeared more stable until it wasn't. They separated after 4 years. Loy never remarried. In interviews, she didn't pretend to be heartbroken or resentful. She simply didn't want to settle. She frequently stated that men desired Nora Charles, not her. They adored the version of her portrayed on screen, the clever, loyal, flirtatious wife who never raised her voice and always had a witty retort. But that was merely a character. Loy was sharper, more private, and unwilling to play a role off-screen. She never had children. People inquired why. She stated she didn't feel the need to justify herself. By the 1950s, she had come to terms with her decisions. She wasn't striving to be the ideal woman. She was merely trying to be truthful. And sometimes, honesty meant walking away. While the media attempted to turn her romantic life into scandal, she stayed one step ahead. No tearful interviews, no public altercations, just quiet departures and clean separations. Hollywood tried to replace her. By the mid-1950s, Hollywood had shifted, and not in her favor. The studios were busy grooming younger faces to replace the great stars of the 1930s. They wanted scandal, headlines, and desperate ambition. Myrna Loy offered none of that. She wasn't going to beg for parts, and she certainly wasn't going to reinvent herself into something she wasn't. After The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer and Mr. Blandings builds his dream house, the offers slowed, not because her talent had faded, but because she had dared to age. In her 40s, Loy was still sharp, radiant, and bankable. But in an industry where women were stamped with an expiration date, Hollywood had quietly decided hers had passed. She refused the humiliation of playing mothers to grown men and dismissed scripts that treated her as background noise. Instead of bending, she pivoted. Loy turned to the stage, stepping into New York theater where craft mattered more than youth and dignity weighed more than box office numbers. There, she performed in the middle of the night and the country girl, commanding audiences with timing, precision, and presence. Critics took notice. She wasn't clinging to stardom, she was proving that her artistry could outlast Hollywood's shallow rules. Myrna Loy had never been built for scandal or desperation. She was built for endurance, and she chose the stage to remind the world exactly why she mattered. She was able to command a room without a close-up. She also began discussing ageism in public. She wasn't resentful when she told a reporter in 1955, "Hollywood knows how to build a star. It still hasn't figured out how to keep one." Simply put, she wasn't blind. Nevertheless, she produced a couple more movies, including Bells on Their Toes and Cheaper by the Dozen. She did not play passive matriarchs. She gave her characters agency, opinion, and edge. She would mature gracefully on TV if she had to. Her effect persisted even as her screen time decreased. She was still referred to be the most professional woman in the industry by directors. She continues to be cited by actors as a model for surviving Hollywood without losing oneself. Relevance wasn't something she sought. She remained calm. As usual, she simply adjusted in silence. She left without saying sorry. Maui accomplished something that few actresses of her time could claim by the 1960s. They retired without making headlines in tabloids. She didn't announce anything significant. She didn't defend herself on talk shows. She simply stopped attending casting calls. She didn't have to. She had produced more than 120 movies. She has shared the screen with Spencer Tracy, Cary Grant, Clark Gable, and William Powell. She had outlived the contracts designed to govern her, beaten the studio system, and survived the silent age. After relocating to New York, she concentrated on writing, activism, and public service. Her autobiography, Being and Becoming, was released. It was free of Hollywood rumors in 1987. It was about identity, about being simultaneously watched, wanted, ignored, and misinterpreted. She described herself up better than any headline ever could in that book. "I never had to play dumb. I just had to play it cool." When it mattered, she continued to go to events. She made appearances at fundraisers for women's rights, film preservation panels, and tributes. However, she never made an effort to take back the limelight. There was no need to remember her. She was already. Her lifetime of work earned her an honorary Academy Award in 1991. She received a standing ovation from the audience. She didn't cry. She thanked a few names, cracked a dry joke, and left the stage. The classic lie. At the age of 88, she quietly died in 1993. Just the conclusion of an extremely rare and lengthy career, no scandal, no grand finale. Hollywood never got the version of Loy that it desired. She presented them with her version. She never staged a feud, revealed a relationship, or posed half-naked. She was not required to. Without seeking notoriety, she established a legacy. She outwitted studio executives, reprimanded fascists, avoided poor roles, and kept her private life just that, secret. She was referred to as the Hollywood Queen. She never gave herself a name. Because you don't need to explain when you do things well. A director was stopped cold by one look. One choice almost put an end to her career, and one scene sent censors into a panic. Gene Simmons made no indication. With a significant impact, she revealed, "This isn't your grandmother's Hollywood story." When Gene Simmons made her first appearance on a film set at the age of 14, it was for the movie Give Us the Moon. Although it was a light-hearted comedy, casting directors saw something more profound in her. It was a natural blend of edge and innocence. She received a small role with Vivien Leigh and Claude Rains in Caesar and Cleopatra by 1945. Jean's eyes captured every frame, despite her lack of professional training. Critics drew attention to her, even with a few lines. According to one report, she was more noticeable than most celebrities twice her age. Not everyone ignored that attention. She was already establishing herself as a studio favorite back in London. The fact that she followed instructions exactly while still contributing something unique pleased the directors. Nobody was able to fully explain it. She was reserved and quiet, but she surprised everyone with a performance that was very hot. Britain was still recuperating from the war at this period. Even when rationing was in effect, Jean was appearing in magazines, getting dressed for roles, and walking on elaborate sets. She became a representation of post-war optimism and a little bit of fantasy for a nation seeking escape. She started to get cast in parts intended for more experienced actresses by producers. Her appearance was that of a teenager, yet she exuded the screen presence of a lady who had experienced something. She became unpredictable and difficult to forget as a result. That pleased the studios. The public did, too. But it wasn't just her talent that made her stand out. It was the way she infused intimacy into each close-up. The camera wasn't her stage. She allowed the camera to approach her. It seemed risky in the finest manner to be restrained like that, especially at the age of 15. Everyone was startled by Olivia's role. When she was just 18, she was paired with Hamlet director and star Laurence Olivier. It was a brave decision. Some claimed she was too unknown and too young. Others didn't see her, but Olivier did. When the movie first came out, reviewers couldn't stop talking about it. Her Oilia was intense but delicate. Her descent into crazy during the breakdown moment was devastating. She didn't flail or scream. Her eyes spoke a story that no one could ignore, even though she seldom lifted her voice. That sequence became one of the most talked about performances of the year, and one director on set said, "She didn't act the scene, she became it." Some described it as captivating. Others claimed that for a young actress, it was excessive and overly unpolished. Nor were the censors excited. Her emotional scenes were deemed too explicit by them. People felt uneasy just looking at her sad, broken, and unvarnished face, even though she wasn't doing anything explicit. She did it too well, not because she did something incorrectly. She was nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her performance. In Hollywood, it was uncommon for a young British actress to receive such acclaim, but Gone made it seem easy. However, nobody noticed how well managed the set was. Actors were notoriously pushed by Olivier. After lengthy takes, Simmons was frequently left feeling worn out. It took more than a dozen attempts to get her breakdown in some scenes. She never voiced any complaints. Not only did Hamlet advance her career, it demonstrated to the public that she wasn't scared of challenging roles. She didn't require large motions or gaudy lines. She employed quiet, silence, and a single glance. There was no breakout here. This served as a warning. Gene Simmons was more than just a movie star. She has the power to alter their emotions. Brave and Barefoot in the Himalayas. Although she wasn't the main character in Black Narcissus, Jean Simmons could have easily been. She portrayed an adolescent Himalayan girl named Kai. Just presence, emotion, and movement, no dialogue or history. And reviewers and spectators were sufficiently shaken. In most situations, she walked barefoot, wore a light sari, and applied minimal makeup. She didn't give a subtle performance. It was audacious, seductive, and completely quiet. She went quite the other way for someone who had been schooled in British discipline. The fact that it was the same girl from Hamlet astounded the audience. They spooked out the censors. Even though a British girl wearing brownface was already contentious, it felt more explosive because of her body, the way she walked, the way she looked at males, and the way she moved through space. A few scenes were on the verge of being cut. Critics were undecided about whether to commend or chastise her. The fact that Gone was only 19 made it much more bizarre. She had no prior dancing or theater experience. Under the direction of directors Powell and Pressburger, she picked up all the knowledge on the fly. She did what they advised, don't think, just feel. The outcome was captivating. Simmons was anxious behind the scenes. She feared appearing foolish. The thick makeup was something she detested. She knew she had done something unusual, though, when she saw the finished cut. Without uttering a word, she forced people to watch. Her performance heightened the already tense film. Nuns battling desire, loneliness in the mountains, and pent-up emotions about to explode. The spark, the reminder that human desire could not be concealed indefinitely, was Jean's character. No one glamorized her. She lacked polish. She was youthful, unfiltered, and nearly too real for the screen. The audience either averted their gazes or gasped. Everything changed because of that job. Casting directors' perceptions of her changed after that. She was capable of playing both threatening and quiet. It's the kind of danger that ambushes you without being obvious or noisy. Her voice was muted by marriage. In 1950, she wed Stuart Granger. It appeared to be a Hollywood romance on paper. He was well known. The rising star was her. The media referred to them as flawless, glitzy, and elegant. However, the reality behind the curtain was far more nuanced and less romantic. Granger had 16 years of age. When Jean first saw him on sight, he was already well known. They clicked right away. The Control did the same. Granger quickly assumed control of choices, agreements, and even the roles she played after the wedding. The picture was adored by the studios. The pair was paraded in magazines, but Jean's friends and family began to notice changes. She became lighter. On set, she became quieter. Her fire remained, but it seemed to have faded. Granger's jealousy was obvious. He detested the attention Jean received. He frequently intervened when she was offered main roles, claiming that the scripts weren't suitable for her. He even declined positions on her behalf without telling her, according to several insiders. Their marriage became a topic of conversation, not because it was romantic but more because of the conflict it caused in her work. According to one studio executive, Jean was gold, but we couldn't get to her without going through Stuart. Still, she stayed, at least for a while. She smiled when she did interviews, but behind closed doors, she began to push back. She wanted to work in America. Granger wasn't happy about it. She wanted control over her own contracts. She allegedly argued with crew members on the Young Best set over last-minute changes made by Granger, who was always giving backstage advice. By her early 50s, it was obvious that this marriage wasn't helping her career, rather, it was holding it up, and Jean knew it. The girl who had once shocked the screen in silence was now fighting to speak out of it, and she filed a lawsuit against Howard Hughes. She was under contract with the top organization in the UK in 1951, but Hughes wanted her for RKO in Hollywood, so he acquired her contract. At first, it appeared like a career goldmine, but Jean Simmons gave him a plain, forceful, and unapologetic no. There was a catch. Hughes didn't want to make her famous, instead, he wanted to own her. She promptly returned the expensive gifts, jewelry, perfume, and clothing he sent her, and he offered her roles, but only in projects under his control. Scripts were delayed, promises were broken, and Jean was stuck. The last straw was when Hughes tried to pressure her into a long-term extension, but Jean refused. He pushed harder, and she retaliated by suing him, a career risk that few actresses would have dared to take, especially against a man with Hughes' influence and power. The legal battle was ugly. The judge sided with Jean, granting her permission to make one more film under RKO, but after that, she was free. The final film would be Angel Face, more on that later. She was accused of being ungrateful, difficult, and spoiled, but she didn't bat an eye. Her lawyer claimed Hughes was purposefully sabotaging her career, and he was. After the case, other actresses began to take notice. Simmons had done what they were told was impossible. She stood up to the system without destroying herself. Jean had fought back and won against one of Hollywood's biggest moguls. What was remarkable was not just that she fought back, but also how calmly she did it. No gossip columns, no public outbursts, just quiet, steady defiance. It was supposed to be just another noir, but Gene Simmons made it unforgettable and almost unwatchable for the censors. Angel Face, directed by Otto Preminger, paired her with Robert Mitchum in a twisted love story full of manipulation and mind games. The scene with the slip dress that hurt. She wore a silk slip and moved through the frame as if she knew exactly how much control she had. It was quiet, calculated, and dangerous. Preminger pushed her hard. She left the set in tears on some days. One scene where she slaps Mitchum turned chaotic. He slapped her back in real life, not in the script. The camera continued to roll. The most talked about scene was shot in her bedroom, where Jean wore a skimpy nightgown that barely passed code. Her expression was hypnotic, cold, and unreadable. Studio executives attempted to reshoot the scene, but Preminger refused. Simmons never apologized, and it remained in the film. Critics were unsure of Jean's character, with one critic stating that she was too still and unreadable. Off-screen, Simmons maintained a professional yet detached demeanor. She didn't like Premier's style, but she respected the outcome. It wasn't fun, she once said, but it worked. Another described her performance as the quietest form of violence ever filmed, leaving audiences unsure of whether to cheer for her or flee her, exactly what Preminger wanted. This wasn't Gene Simmons the Enenu, this was Gene Simmons with teeth. Angel Face didn't do well at the box office, but it became a cult classic. Fans played back that one-bedroom scene like it was gospel, directors studied it, and actresses imitated her stillness. She knew what the role required, and she gave it without blinking. The robe was supposed to be a biblical epic, clean, reverent, and traditional, but Gene Simmons made sure it came with a side of scandal. This wasn't because of anything in the script, but because of a single promotional photo of Simmons in costume, bare-backed, slightly turned, eyes locked on the lens, which appeared in a national magazine. Once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The backless photo caused a stir. Some theaters threatened to pull the film unless the image was censored, and the studio swiftly ordered retouched versions, covering her back with additional fabric. Simmons didn't object. They were talking about that picture. She wasn't naked, but she didn't need to be. The curve of her back, the expression on her face, it was suggestive without trying. She didn't apologize either, but what most people didn't realize was that The Robe was the first movie she made after winning her legal battle with RKO and Howard Hughes. No more stalled scripts, no more interference. She was finally in charge of her career, or so she believed. Behind the scenes, she was still sorting out the fallout from her contract. Even as The Robe became a box office hit, Jean continued to demonstrate her independence and bankability while also assuming a new type of role, the strong, morally complex woman. Despite her legal freedom, industry politics prevented many producers from casting her immediately, and her refusal to follow studio rules made her challenging. She no longer played the wide-eyed Genenu. Instead, she played characters torn by faith, loyalty, and quiet desire, which is what made her stand out in the robe. Jean Simmons had perfected the art of subtle danger by the mid-1950s. She didn't need to raise her voice or storm into a room to command attention, while others gave grand speeches. Jean did more with a glance or a pause, staring down Spartacus with fire. Nowhere was that more evident than in Spartacus, where she played Vinia, a strong-willed, patient, and intensely loving character who wasn't just the love interest but also the film's emotional center and the silent resistance behind Spartacus' rebellion. When Kirk Douglas's character first meets her, she doesn't beg or flirt, instead, she watches. The film was huge, with a huge budget and a large cast, but Simmons never lost her presence in the crowd, even when surrounded by senators and warriors. One pivotal scene in a bathhouse, where she is fully clothed but emotionally bare, left viewers holding their breath. She listens. And that look, which is equal parts softness and defiance, spoke volumes. Director Stanley Kubrick said she could do more with silence than most actors could with 3 pages of dialogue, and that was true. She didn't rely on ostentatious performances, her strength was restraint, holding back just enough to make the audience lean in. She followed Kubrick's lead and stuck to her style, which didn't require constant rehearsal or rewrites, just space to breathe. Off-screen, things were more tense. Douglas, ever the perfectionist, reportedly tried to direct her at times, but Jean didn't bite. What was different about Spartacus was that it demonstrated how far she had come. By this point, Simmons had developed a signature move, holding the camera's gaze just a second too long, never overdone, just enough to make the audience shift in their seats. That was her gift, making modesty feel provocative, making discomfort feel beautiful. She had chosen this role and molded it into something greater than what was written on the page. After her divorce from Stuart Granger in 1960, Jean Simmons took on some of her most daring parts despite Hollywood's expectations that she would sink into the background. She wasn't attempting to surprise anyone, but she was finally in charge. And the first move, Elmer Gantry. She played Sister Sharon Falconer in the movie, a powerful, mysterious, and unflinchingly confident preacher. Simmons didn't flinch opposite Burt Lancaster, their chemistry felt electric, even hostile at times. Her character wasn't there to be subdued, she had her own secrets and mission. The role signaled a change. Jean was in complete control, with no husband interfering or the studio head pulling strings. Her performance was described by critics as quietly commanding and chillingly calm, and audiences saw a side of Simmons they had never seen before, fierce, focused, and totally in her element. The walls came down after that. She began speaking more openly in interviews, revealing how controlled her previous career had been, describing how she was dressed like a doll, told where to sit and when to smile, and saying, "I wasn't rebellious, I just had a brain." She also began selecting roles that reflected the complexity of her real life. By 1964, she had officially left her inventive past behind, and her new characters were layered, modern, and occasionally bitter, but never weak. She had always known how to make silence speak, but now it screamed. In Life at the Top, she played a woman trapped in a cold marriage, giving one of her most emotionally raw performances, and critics praised how much pain she conveyed without raising her voice. Jean Simmons had survived the studio system, defied Hollywood men, and left a toxic marriage, so what followed wasn't a comeback. Simmons' personal life was quiet, devoid of tabloid stunts, and her work spoke for itself, whether she was playing women cornered by power or burned by love. When most of her peers had faded into cameos or early retirement, Jean Simmons made a move that shocked everyone in 1983, she went to television. And not just any TV role either. She signed on for The Thornbirds, a sweeping, high-stakes miniseries that would become a cultural event. Audiences didn't just watch The Thornbirds, they devoured it. Nearly 100 million people watched it. She played Fiona Clearary, the cold, emotionally distant matriarch of the family. This was a significant change from the warm, gentle characters people associated with Simmons. Fiona wasn't cruel, but she wasn't loving either. She was closed off, wounded, and quietly ruthless, and Jean played her with complete control. Simmons fought back against heavyweights like Barbara Stanwyck and Richard Chamberlain, and in some scenes, she took center stage. Her performance earned her an Emmy for the way she sat, paused, and looked away at the right moment, not just the lines she said. More than that, though, she regained her prominence and demonstrated that actresses over 50 weren't merely supporting roles, they could take the lead, drive a plot, and be just as bold, if not bolder, than they had been decades before. Simmons was composed, professional, and laser-focused behind the scenes. Younger cast members characterized her as gracious but reserved. She wasn't there for gossip, she was there to work. That role completed her transition from teenage wannabe to Hollywood rebel, from silent power to full-on matriarch. Despite having nothing left to prove, she managed to give performances that left audiences in awe. As one crew member remembered, she'd walk onto set, say almost nothing, and nail it on the first take. By the time The Thornbirds aired, one thing was certain: Gene Simmons was the scream queen, the stunning ghoul who kept horror fans on the edge of their seats for decades. She didn't reinvent herself. Instead, she simply kept showing up as she was: clever, understated, and unavoidable. Beyond her achievements and behind the scenes, this stunning and voluptuous woman was a woman the world hardly knew, but she managed to keep her fans coming back for more, and as a result, she became one of the most renowned actresses in British horror cinema. Ingrid Pitt's story will make you wonder if you actually knew her, from her distaste for horror movies to her horrifying real-life experiences. Surviving the Nazis, Ingrid spent the majority of her life making horror movies come to life, but many people are unaware that she was probably skilled at portraying horror because she experienced terrible things as a young girl. It all began on November 21, 1937, in Poland, where Ingrid was born amid chaos. In a 2006 interview with the New Zealand Herald, she said, "I think it's very amazing that I do horror films when I had this awful childhood. Perhaps that's why I'm excellent at it." It has been speculated over the years that her true name was Ingushka Petro, which she altered for personal reasons. Her mother, a Polish Jew, and father, a German, were both prepared to raise their children when life took a sudden and terrible turn. Tragic events occurred a few years after Ingrid's birth. The Nazis seized her family, and before she knew what was happening, she was taken to the Stut concentration camp with her mother, where she experienced the horrors of real life. Ingrid had no idea where her father and sister had been taken. One can only imagine how traumatizing this experience was for Ingrid, who was only 5 years old at the time. She witnessed the death of her own mother's best friend, as well as the abuse and sexual assault of young girls, all of which occurred directly in front of her. Unfortunately, the torment did not cease as quickly as she had anticipated, and she and her mother were kept there for the next 3 years with little chance of ever going back to their normal life. All she could do was hope and pray that fate had a better plan and that all of these things would end soon. But in the middle of this grim reality, she started to dream of a better life. She would frequently lie in the straw and imagine what her life would be like if she were someone else. She felt as though she was going to see life from a different perspective, maybe one that was untarnished by the horrors and restrictions of a concentration camp. Music. After the war, Ingrid and her mother left the camp after 3 arduous years and started looking for her father and sister. Sadly, their aspirations of bringing the family back together were shattered when her father was discovered. He had become a shell of his former self and died soon after. She became a well-known actress on the East Berlin stage during that time, and the time she spent performing in theater allowed her to refine her skills before she began to appear in films. Ingrid began nursing dreams of becoming an actress during that time, and she made the decision to pursue this passion fervently. It was reported that she became involved in theater productions prior to beginning her screen career. It's interesting to note that, despite her inability to speak Spanish at the time, Ingrid managed to immerse herself in the industry with the intention of eventually going global, spending the majority of the mid-1960s in mostly uncredited roles in Spanish films. She was fortunate to have a supporting role in the 1968 film Where Eagles Dare, where she played Agent Heidi and co-starred with Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood. It was this role that brought her to the attention of Hammer Film Productions executives, who recognized that her talent and her Eastern European, glamorous appearance would be a surefire way to succeed. Ingrid's voyage into the world of horror began in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when Gothic horror films were making a comeback. Shortly after, she was cast as vampiress Myrna, marking the start of a noteworthy career in the genre and making her the queen of horror. As the mysterious blood-sucker, Ingrid brought a seductive allure to the screen, redefining the image of female vampires in the process. Her breakthrough role in The Vampire Lovers in 1970, which not only demonstrated her acting prowess but also cemented her status as a horror icon, was the catalyst for Ingrid's rapid rise to fame in the genre thanks to her stunning beauty, commanding on-screen presence, and voice that could send shivers down your spine. But it wasn't just about the fangs and the supernatural. Ingrid Pitt had a way of giving her characters nuance and complexity. Her portrayal of the infamous Countess Elizabeth Bay in Countess Dracula 1971, which combined historical drama and horror, wasn't merely a demonstration of her ability to evoke fear. Ingrid's reign as the Queen of Horror continued with films like The House That Dripped Blood, still in 1971, and The Wicker Man, in 1973, where her performances left an enduring impression on horror fans. It was a masterclass in the art of fusing terror with a dash of tragic humanity. Off-screen, Ingrid Pitt became a beloved figure at horror conventions and fan events, and her genuine love for the genre and her fans won her a devoted following. It wasn't just about the scares, though, it was about the intensity she brought to every role, making her characters memorable and iconic in the annals of horror history. As the Queen of Horror, Ingrid Pitt's legacy endures, and her influence on the genre reverberates down the halls of cinematic history. It was about the bond she established with those who loved the excitement of a good horror story. Beyond the eerie glow of the silver screen, Ingrid Pitt ventured into the world of words, leaving her mark as not only the Queen of Horror on film, but also as a gifted author. Her presence remains a testament to the enduring allure of horror and the woman who reigned as its beloved queen in the darkened theaters of the past and the living rooms of devoted fans. Ingrid Pitt wrote several books. Ingrid's literary career took off with a series of books that reflected her deep passion for storytelling. Among her notable works is Life's a Scream, 1986, a memoir that peeled back the curtain on her life and gave readers a glimpse into the highs, lows, and thrills of her journey in the film industry. It wasn't just a recounting of her experiences. The same voice that sent shivers down spines is now weaving tales on book pages. It was a story that reflected the bold, independent lady who played the role she did. In addition to her autobiography, Ingrid also dabbled in fiction, writing Cuckoo Run in 1985 and The Bedside Companion 4. Co-authored with David J. Scull, Vampire Lovers 1973, featured her adaptability as a storyteller. The first, a gripping book, showed her capacity to write stories outside of the horror genre. While the latter explored the mythology and attraction of vampires, a topic that was very personal to her, Ingrid Pitt wasn't just interested in providing entertainment, she wanted to spread her passion for the macabre and enigmatic. Her books served as a conduit between her and her followers, giving them a better understanding of the thoughts of the woman who had become a horror icon. Ingrid's voice as a writer echoed with the same charm that made her a popular character on screen, creating vivid scenes of romance, suspense, and terror that invited readers to explore further. The year was 1943, and she invited readers to enter the world she created with her writing. This wasn't Monroe or Gardner, but Jane Russell, and her story only gets wilder from here. The Outlaw wasn't supposed to be a scandal. A movie sat locked in vaults too scandalous for theaters, with a woman lying in hay at its center, rewriting what was permitted on screen. Howard Hughes' low-budget western, which starred a newcomer named Jane Russell, had a bigger goal in mind than just making a movie. He wanted shock value. At the age of 21, Russell had no major roles behind her, so he cast her as a seductive saloon girl named Rio McDonald. While filming was underway, Hughes became fixated on how her figure looked on screen. He created his own solution, a new type of bra, after costumes failed to give him the desired look. Metal rods, wiring, and padding were sewn into a custom design that was intended to lift her bust unnaturally high. Hugh even filed a patent for it. Jane hated it. "That thing hurt like hell," she said years later. "I threw it in the trash and wore my own." Hughes told the press that she wore his invention. He wanted the story to spread, and it did. Then came the picture of Russell lying in hay in a publicity still. According to one censorship board, the picture was morally dangerous, and theaters received angry letters from religious groups and moviegoers who didn't care about the plot wanted to see it. Hughes had a plan, so he sent fictitious protest letters to theaters claiming outrage from concerned citizens after the production code refused to approve the film. It worked, and curious crowds showed up in droves. The 1943 limited release was a chaotic event, with people lining up for blocks in New York and Los Angeles and police being called in some cities to control traffic. The film was shut down in the middle of its run by Chicago. Jane Russell had hardly spoken on screen, but her image was already ingrained in American culture. Her acting did not make her a star, rather, the outlaw made her a symbol of everything Hollywood was afraid to show. It wasn't until 1946 that the film was released nationwide, and by that time, she didn't need it. Howard Hughes had her locked under an exclusive contract, and she was already the most talked about woman in Hollywood without saying a word. After The Outlaw caused a stir in 1943, Jane Russell's name was never out of the papers again, but behind the headlines, she was enmeshed in a tangle of studio politics, lawsuits, and image control, none of which she had requested. She later stated, "I was stuck doing whatever he wanted," meaning she could not choose her roles and no other studio could touch her. "I couldn't even take better parts." Despite pleas from major companies, including Warner Brothers, MGM, and Paramount, Hughes refused to lend her out for years. Then came the court battles, and film censors continued to try to prevent The Outlaw from playing across the country. At the time, Jane wasn't making movies. Instead, she was doing press, magazine covers, pin-up shoots, and public appearances. All of this was done to keep her famous without ever setting foot on set. She became one of the most photographed women in America without releasing a single new film. Jane remained silent in public but later confessed that she detested the circus. "I wanted to act, not pose for advertisements." Hughes retaliated with everything he had, including lawyers, appeals, and even threats to remove his other films from theaters. The film eventually received a wide release in 1946 and made millions of dollars, but the reviews weren't good. People came to see her, so it didn't matter that most people thought the story was boring and the acting was wooden. Hughes had made Jane into a brand, not an actress. In 1947, Jane finally got a new project, Young Widow, which was her first production that wasn't Hughes. The script had depth, and she was eager to show that she could act, but the damage had already been done, and audiences continued to see her as the hey girl. Reviews were mixed. For better or worse, her image had already outgrown the screen, and Hughes wasn't done pulling the strings. The public had decided Jane Russell was worth watching, even though no one could agree on why. Some praised her presence, while others said she was stiff. She later acknowledged that she was still learning, but she wasn't leaving. By 1948, Jane Russell was caught between fame and dissatisfaction. She was well known but hardly employed, and Hughes continued to dictate her roles and reject outside offers. She began to rebel when Hughes offered her a role in the comedy western Paleface, starring Bob Hope. It was the first time she got to show range, but behind the scenes, things weren't easy. Jane didn't think she could do comedy, but she said yes just to get back in front of the camera, and it turned out to be a wise move. The movie was a hit, and audiences loved her timing, and critics acknowledged she held her own next to Hope. She started discreetly asking her lawyers for a way out of the contract, while gossip columns followed her every step. She was photographed all the time, but was rarely quoted, and journalists characterized her as cool, difficult to read, and distant. Hughes micromanaged every decision, approving costumes, scripts, and even haircuts. As a sex symbol in public, but a religious, blunt, and quiet person in private, she was actually fed up with being treated like a mannequin. In 1949, she filmed The Big Steal with Robert Mitchum, a production that was hurried because Mitchum had just been arrested for possession of marijuana, and the studio needed good press, so Jane agreed to the project at short notice. As Mitchum later stated, Jane was tougher than anyone gave her credit for, and she wanted more like that, less glamour, more grit, but Hughes still had her locked down. In 1950, she had publicly argued with studio heads over the roles she was being offered. It was a simple crime story, but she handled it well once more. The pin-up girl had found her voice and was just warming up. Diamonds, blondes, and a stolen show. She was difficult in Hollywood terms because she refused to pose for certain publicity shots and turned down multiple scripts. Jane was no longer playing along, she wanted to act, not sell. And slowly, people were beginning to listen. Jane Russell, who was supposed to play a supporting role in the 1953 film Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, almost stole the show with her co-star Marilyn Monroe, who played the flirtatious, sweet Lorraine, and Jane Russell, who played Dorothy, the shrewd brunette who made the decisions. Even though she didn't want to do it at first because she thought the musical numbers were silly, the studio forced her to do it, and once filming began, she didn't hold back. She handled her own vocals, danced in heels, and rewrote parts of her dialogue. On screen, however, Jane dominated scene after scene. Her timing was cleaner, her delivery was drier, and her attitude was unshakable. Monroe was given more screen time, but Jane was given more control. According to crew members, Russell helped block situations and helped Monroe navigate difficult shots. Then came the drama of the premiere. Here's the rumor. Reporters described Jane as a complete pro, saying she performed both parts on the red carpet and even signed Monroe's name for fans after Monroe declined to attend the Blondes Hollywood premiere. She handled the evening with ease, and the film turned into a worldwide success. Jane's performance received accolades for being humorous and grounded. Although Marilyn garnered recognition for her attractiveness, executives remarked that Jane kept the movie cohesive behind the scenes and never boasted about it. She avoided drama and gave credit to Monroe in interviews, but the people who worked on the movie recognized that Jane was the adult in the room, that she was on time, that she knew her lines, and that she never broke under pressure, and that part solidified her as more than a picture or a body. At the Hollywood Bowl baptism in 1954, Jane Russell shocked fans once more, but this time it had nothing to do with movies or costumes. Hollywood had once again underestimated her, but this time everyone saw what she could really do, and Jane didn't need hay or headlines to prove it. She could command and she could outshine a legend without even trying. It was no publicity stunt when she entered the waters of the Hollywood Bowl and was baptized in front of thousands of people. Jane had always kept her faith private, having grown up in a deeply religious household and reading the Bible every day, but the conflict between her values and her image was becoming more and more apparent. The statement she made at a Billy Graham revival event, where a large crowd watched as Jane walked into the water and was completely submerged, made headlines the following morning. "Movie siren gets saved," one paper wrote. Others called it a mid-career pivot, but Jane didn't care. She wanted to make a statement after years of posing in tight gowns and playing bombshell roles. In interviews, she criticized Hollywood's moral direction, claiming that too many movies glorified sin and labeled some of her earlier work as stupid. She even founded a group called WAIF, World Adoption International Fund, fusing her advocacy and faith, which confused people. She continued to make movies and dress glitzily, but now she was speaking about Jesus on talk shows. The industry didn't know how to handle her shift, so she didn't back down. She mentored struggling actors behind the scenes in private and cautioned young actors to stay grounded and avoid the fast track to ruin in public speeches. Some fans loved it, while others tuned out. Producers referred to her as unpredictable, and some Hollywood insiders made fun of her open faith, accusing her of being judgmental and outdated. Studios were unsure whether she would preach at the premiere or promote a movie, but Jane didn't care because she was no longer seeking acceptance. As the cameras rolled on others, Jane rewrote her own script in real life, a battle with the church, and the lady who had once been deemed too attractive for theaters was now discussing redemption and doing it on her own terms. She chose to adopt after multiple losses, but adoption in the 1950s was difficult, particularly when it was done internationally. It took more than a year to adopt her first adoptive son, Tommy, who was from Ireland. In interviews, Jane described the system as heartless and said it cared more about rules than children, so she took matters into her own hands. In one instance, she flew overseas, met with the child's caregivers, and returned with the baby before full approval, claiming it was legal under emergency conditions. Jane became frustrated with church politics and red tape, believing too many children were stuck in orphanages while paperwork dragged on. The press dubbed it baby smuggling, but Jane saw it as saving a life. The incident spurred her to establish WAIF, the World Adoption International Fund, which helped match orphans with homes around the world. Jane used her celebrity to raise money and persuade policymakers. She worked with embassies to change regulations and testified before Congress, but the backlash was real. She was accused by Catholic leaders in Ireland of undermining church-run orphanages, and one priest called her reckless and self-righteous. Jane responded that the church was more concerned with control than with compassion, but she continued to expand her work in spite of the criticism. At its height, WAIF assisted in placing hundreds of children in homes. This wasn't the Hollywood work that people expected from a screen siren, but Jane didn't care about expectations. She personally reviewed applications and even helped some families with their travel expenses. "If I'd waited for the world's approval, I'd still be posing in Hay," Jane said. The roles in movies paid the bills, and the work in adoption, she claimed, saved her soul. Russell versus feminism. In a time when women's liberation was gaining momentum, Jane chose the opposite path and made sure everyone knew it. Her California home became a center for her causes, and although she rarely discussed her children in public and kept them out of the spotlight, she later called them her greatest work. In one 1973 interview, she described second-wave feminism as a tangle of irate women screaming about issues they caused, saying, "I don't know what they're fighting for." She argued with feminist guests and kept her own even when audiences jeered her, and her quote alone set off a chain reaction. Talk show hosts enjoyed hiring her. Gloria Steinem supporters criticized her for being out of date, and some women's organizations urged sponsors to remove her from endorsements, but Russell didn't bat an eye. She claimed that women already had power but were squandering it on bitterness. "I've worked with men my whole life," she said. "I never needed to burn my bra to get respect. Shouting is not a sign of strength. It's about being aware of your identity." Ironically, critics pointed out that her early roles did just that. Jane didn't deny it, but she said the issue wasn't the image, but rather the intention behind it. By this point, she was concentrating on her charity work and religious activism. She also criticized Hollywood for depicting women as helpless victims or hypersexualized clichés. She wasn't attempting to please anyone, but her conservative views garnered more media attention than her advocacy. She considered Roe v. Wade a mistake and said America needed more churches and less therapy. In any case, she remained recognizable, whether it was because her supporters regarded her as fearless or because the feminist movement saw her as a relic. In the 1980s, most actresses from her era were long retired, but not Jane Russell, who continued to appear louder, bolder, and utterly unwilling to change. Whether you liked her or not, she refused to play the part that was assigned to her. At 60, she signed a national advertising deal to model Plex bras. With the tagline, "Does your bra have to show your age?" the advertisements appeared on television, in publications, and in stores across America. While most ladies her age were supposed to fade into the background, Jane appeared in full glam, promoting support bras to actual women. Critics rolled their eyes, but Jane didn't believe it. In an interview, she said, "I wore bras before most of these ad execs were born, so she didn't care." The campaign was successful, and sales increased, particularly among older women who found her personable rather than absurd. However, this comeback was more than just advertisements. "I know what works," and she meant it. She resumed her public appearances, including religious organizations, charity galas, and even morning talk shows. She wasn't doing movies, but she wasn't disappearing either. She managed to maintain her public presence without appearing younger than she actually was, and she wasn't scared to speak out against ageism. When a reporter asked her if she would consider a comeback movie, she said, "Sure, if they let me play a 60-year-old woman who acts like one." She also joked that it was the first time in her life that people were more concerned with her comfort than her appearance. "It took too long." Not for shock, but for surprise, the lingerie campaign made headlines. No one anticipated that Jane Russell, the one silent symbol of scandal, would become the face of mature confidence. Her attempt to relate rather than seduce struck a deeper chord than any bombshell act could. In a company that dismissed women after the age of 40, Jane Russell didn't simply refuse to fade. While most Golden Age stars retired quietly, Jane turned up the volume with interviews that frequently went viral, at least by pre-internet standards. She returned to the public in a bra and reminded them of who she was, and she did it with a wink, not an apology. She criticized rising stars for acting like victims rather than women, and she called modern movies trash with sound effects on one local television segment. When a host tried to draw her back to civil discourse, Jane doubled down. She also leaned more into politics, identifying as a proud conservative, advocating for prayer in schools, and speaking at a number of Republican events. Despite not gaining new followers, her criticism of Hollywood's moral decline and her claim that most performers today are spoiled and lack guts kept her in the news, and in 1999 she made headlines once more for all the wrong reasons when she was arrested for driving under the influence in California. "At my age, you're lucky to get a story printed about you, even if it's for drinking," she joked later, referring to the fact that her blood alcohol level was almost twice the legal limit. She was in her late 70s when the tabloids pounced, and one headline read, "Busted Bombshell." She didn't deny it, she didn't spin it, and she most definitely didn't apologize in public. She hardly ever backed down, even when reprimanded. She acknowledged in one interview that she did not subscribe to political correctness. "Turn the channel if you don't agree with what I say." No regrets at the end. At the age of 89, she died in 2011. As expected, she spent her last years without any edits, filters, or regrets. She spoke at neighborhood gatherings and was involved in her church over the most of her final 10 years in Santa Maria, California. She was outspoken but accessible, according to her neighbors. She would respond if you inquired about her background, but she wouldn't mince words. She avoided doing sentimental interviews. She never went to a retrospective. In her last interviews, she stayed true to her beliefs when asked why she didn't attend tributes or award shows. "I didn't go for applause when I was working. Why would I show up for it now?" She continued to defend her early work, critique Hollywood's direction, and reject current feminism. Even the sections that were originally deemed scandalous. She claimed that "I met my own standards and provided the public what they desired." Until the very end, she also talked about faith. She enjoyed the fact that church was her true stage. "It was the only place," she said, "that never required me to be someone else." The headlines were anticipated when word leaked out about her passing. The majority concentrated on her body, the Hay photo, and the outlaw. Few emphasized her battles with censors, her decades of charitable work, or the fact that she had outlived the majority of her contemporaries. There was no lengthy statement from her family. They claimed that she died quietly while sleeping with her loved ones at her side. No red carpet send-off, no funeral extravaganza. Jane Russell never needed the limelight, so that felt appropriate. She was the type of celebrity who took it and then returned it after she was finished. No last-minute reinvention, no legacy spin, just one last act of doing what she always did. Maturing truthfully, living loudly, and never following someone else's plan. Although you are familiar with Gene Tierney from Heaven Can Wait and Laura, you are unfamiliar with the lady the studios attempted to conceal. This is the true tale. Stripped naked. Beauty makes her Broadway debut. Gene Tierney was already attracting attention on the East Coast before Hollywood ever took notice of her. She was raised surrounded by books, etiquette, and pressure after being born in Brooklyn in 1920. Her dad was a prosperous insurance salesman. Her mother was an exacting gym instructor with high standards. Although Jean was brought up to be polite, she secretly wished to be noticed. On a family vacation in California when she was 17, she went to Warner Brothers Studios. Everything changed when a cameraman noticed her profile and remarked casually, "You ought to be in pictures." Her father, however, demanded that she complete her education first. She went to Swiss finishing school, picked up French, and came back poised, almost too poised. Her beauty was being discussed in newspapers by 1938, when she made her debut at a society function. She wasn't satisfied with becoming a debutante, though. She desired the stage. In 1938, she got her first Broadway part in What a Life. Despite the modest role, critics took note of her. It only took the New York Times to describe her as striking. One audience member, Darryl F. Zanuck, the creator of 20th Century Fox, expressed interest in her and she promptly secured another job in The Male Animal. She was given a screen test by Zanuck. Jean gave a tense smile on the test video, but the camera adored her. She didn't require much coaching because of her large eyes, cheekbones, and steady voice. In 1940, she agreed to a deal with Fox. Jean, however, was more than simply a gorgeous face. She demanded roles that didn't confine her from the start. She wouldn't pretend to be weak or stupid. She even declined early assignments that asked her to overact or simulate a strong accent. She was quiet. She was not required to be. When Jean Tierney entered a room, the quiet took care of itself. She had left Broadway by the end of 1940, and Hollywood was just now beginning to see what it had. A starlet signed by Fox. After she signed with 20th Century Fox in 1940, the studio quickly turned her into a movie star. She was 20 years old, just off Broadway, and already known for being unavoidable. She co-starred with Henry Fonda in The Return of Frank James, her debut feature under Fox. She portrayed aspiring newspaper reporter Eleanor Stone. It wasn't the most spectacular aspect, but it was effective. The studio noticed the box office, and audiences spotted her. In the 1940s, a contract meant more than just a wage, but Fox understood they had a gold mine. It denoted possession. Studio executives chose your screenplays, molded your public persona, and even advised you on potential partners. Jean didn't give in easily, but she did play along. One of her defining characteristics was her refusal to have her name changed or to have her eyebrows plucked. She played a gunslinging Southern rebel in Belle Starr after starring in Tobacco Road in 1941. Although both movies were successful, the reviews weren't good. She was referred to as stiff by some, and merely a face by others. She was discreetly watching other actors on set and taking acting classes behind the scenes. She had no desire to be merely ornamental. Fox gave her a firmer shove. Moving swiftly between comedies and dramas, she was starring in movies like Sundown and Rings on Her Fingers by 1942. In an effort to elevate her profile, the studio put her face on posters, positioned her as the most attractive lady in movies, and partnered her with well-known people. She didn't voice any complaints. She never stopped working. She starred in 9 movies between 1940 and 1943, some of which were forgettable and some of them weren't. The build-up was what counted. Zanuck thought Gone was just one big role away from becoming well-known. He was correct. Without following all the rules, Tierney managed to wriggle her way out of little parts and into the coveted position of leading woman by the end of 1943. She avoided making out with the media. She refrained from pursuing controversy. She arrived, made her point, and let the camera speak for her. There were a lot of loud starlets in Hollywood. The world came to Jean Tierney as she simply remained motionless. Heaven Can Wait was scandalized. Jean Tierney's appearance in the 1943 Technicolor fantasy comedy Heaven Can Wait didn't seem like it would define her career, but it did. Gone portrayed Martha Strebel Van Cleve, a devoted wife who puts up with her husband's foolishness for the rest of her life with quiet dignity and flair. Ernst Lubbock directed the picture, which was a polished high society romp. The audience saw a change. She was radiant in addition to being gorgeous. At last, the critics were more lenient. She outshone the sets, which were intended to resemble real heaven, according to the Los Angeles Times. Her voice, her elegance, and her face were all the talk of the town. She appeared invulnerable. But there was an odd undertone to the compliments. Jean struggled behind the camera with the way Hollywood wanted her to look. She was forced to pose for more daring photo spreads by the studio. Elegance with danger is how one publicist characterized her attraction. Despite her discomfort with the clothing choices, she consented until a single advertisement featuring her in a clinging satin gown went viral nationwide. That picture was all over the place. The letters came flooding in. A few fans were furious. Others had an obsession. Tierney found himself the focus of unwelcome scrutiny. She refrained from doing interviews over the picture. Although she didn't voice her displeasure in public, acquaintances later claimed that she detested the way the incident altered her reputation. But studio execs recognized opportunities. Her status as a movie star was solidified by the picture in the movie. She received a National Board of Review Award nomination. All of a sudden, Jean was the focus of every fan magazine and fashion piece. Her phone kept ringing. She was sought after by directors. She was pursued by reporters. She now represented a brand new category of leading lady. Smart, sophisticated, but winkingly marketed to the general population. Jean did not trust the wave, but she also did not oppose it. It would not be long before the painting began haunting people. She once said to a friend, "They talk about you like you're a painting they just hung." Infatuation with Laura Sparks. Music. Laura 1944 made Jean Tierney a legend and a ghost, whilst Heaven Can Wait made Jean a star. In the psychological noir film, which was directed by Otto Preminger, Jean portrayed the titular character, a captivating woman who attracted men despite her purported death. A detective who looks into her death in the film develops an obsession with her portrait. The twist is that she isn't quite dead. Halfway through the movie, she enters, graceful and vibrant, and she dazzles both him and the audience. That picture got famous. It was actually an image that had been altered to resemble a painting. It didn't matter to many, though. Jean changed her name to Laura. Letters were written by strangers who claimed to have fallen in love with her persona. Some even reported having dreams about her. The fascination veered into a disturbing area. Fox apparently received a letter from a man asking for the painting for his bedroom. Every week, another sent marriage offers. It was not flattering to Jean. It was unsettling to her. The movie was a success. It was praised by critics as one of the decade's greatest mysteries. Jean's performance was hailed for being emotionally charged but controlled, icy and vulnerable. When she appeared on screen, the camera hardly moved. It didn't have to. The journalists, who were her harshest critics, praised her. Even The New Yorker, who is notorious for ignoring movie stars, acknowledged that she had a haunting presence. However, there was a price for the movie's success. People appeared to care less about Jean Tierney the more they loved Laura. The studio leaned in. More Mystery Woman headlines, more photos, more posters. Behind the scenes, Jean started to feel like the exact thing that made her famous was erasing her. Tragedy and Tyrone Power. One of Hollywood's top male stars, Tyrone Power, and Jean Tierney started dating in 1946. He was charming, incredibly attractive, and as confined by her notoriety as she was. They clicked right away when they met at a dinner gathering. Their relationship wasn't seamless, though, despite the well-groomed smiles. Power was emotionally aloof and had just returned from World War II service. Gone was emotionally vulnerable after finishing a number of demanding cinematic assignments. Nevertheless, they had a covert relationship for more than a year, frequently visiting Mexico or slinking past the studio's constant photographers. "He was the only man I ever truly loved," she once stated. Tyrone's departure to film captain from Castile overseas caused their romance to stop. Jean hoped to be ready for marriage when he returned. Rather, he returned with a new story and a greater distance. According to reports, Jean's family disapproved of him. Despite her upbringing, she was not sufficiently high class. She was devastated by that rejection. He put a permanent end to it in 1947. Jean went into a spiral. She stopped going out, as her friends noticed. She seemed unreachable, according to one co-star. Despite feeling abandoned and humiliated, she immersed herself in her work. P's subsequent union with Linda Christian, a Latin actress, was well reported. Jean didn't say anything, but she didn't keep her heart broken from her loved ones. The loss was public as well as personal. For months, gossip columns had conjectured about a wedding that never took place. She became the focus of derogatory headlines and articles about what went wrong, such as how cold or controlling women can be. In retrospect, it wasn't merely a split. It was the first public rift in the reputation Jean had worked so hard to cultivate. The actual thing has overtaken the woman who could make men fall in love with a painting. Although she never dated Tyrone again, she also never moved on from him. Silent suffering and motherhood. Jean Tierney became pregnant with her first child, Daria, in 1943, when she was at the height of her fame. She was overjoyed. For once, her life appeared stable after she wed fashion designer Oleg Cassini earlier that year. But a terrible event happened. During her early pregnancy, she was at a Hollywood canteen event for soldiers when a female fan approached her. Despite having German measles and rubella, the woman sneaked out of quarantine to meet Jean. Unaware of the danger, the celebrity gave her a warm greeting and posed for a picture. Jean gave birth to Daria a few months later. The infant was born with significant developmental disabilities, blindness, and partial deafness. Physicians verified the cause. Exposure to rubella during pregnancy. Jean was heartbroken. She was almost overcome by guilt. Despite not knowing what had transpired until after the fact, she placed the guilt on herself. The strain began to strain her marriage to Cassini. They were often fighting over guilt, care, and treatment. Daria needed long-term care, and Cassini intended to send her to a private facility. Knowing that she couldn't provide the child with the care she required on her own, Jean first objected but ultimately gave in. The admirer who made her public. That woman came up to Jean once more years later, at a book signing, and confessed. Jean was startled but courteous. "You have given me the most dreadful sorrow of my life." She hardly ever mentioned Daria in public. When she did, it was controlled and brief. She frequently went to see her daughter, sometimes with books or toys, but always with tears in her eyes. This tragedy turned into a personal burden that followed Jean to every movie, red carpet, and staged grin. She continued to show up and work. However, there was a change behind her eyes. Her admirers witnessed glitz. Her peers saw her melancholy. She didn't wear grief, according to one friend. Her voice embodied it. Rehabilitation and mental health facilities. Jean Tierney was falling apart by the early 1950s. People on the set noticed, but the press hadn't yet reported it. She occasionally froze during situations, lost weight, and missed lines. She struggled to fall asleep. She suddenly started crying. She left Hollywood after completing The Left Hand of God in 1955. She made an effort to heal in secret. She was diagnosed with manic depression by doctors, which is today called bipolar disorder. Rest instructions and barbiturates were administered to her, but to no use. One day she was filled with joy, the next she was depressed. She was characterized by friends as aloof and spectral. She willingly checked herself into a mental health facility in New York called the Harkness Pavilion in 1957. She was transferred to the Institute of Living in Connecticut when her health didn't get better. She received more than 20 rounds of electroshock treatment there. She then claimed to have lost large portions of her memory, including childhood memories and whole scripts. She spent years in and out of institutions. She tried to make a comeback during a break in 1958 by working in a department shop using a fictitious name. Jean Tierney broke while working in retail after a customer identified her and the tabloids ran with the tale. The reality was more nuanced. She was making an effort to feel normal once more. Behind the scenes, she was gradually getting back on her feet, despite the media portraying it as a fall from grace. Counseling was beneficial. The medication was altered. She wrote to Daria once more and reunited with pals. After a while, she cautiously returned to public life. Some directors recalled her abilities, but not everyone was happy to see her again. She was stronger, but she wasn't cured. Rumors of a JFK romance abound, and she subsequently commented, "You don't come back the same, but you come back." John F. Kennedy met Jean Tierney long before he was elected president. Their relationship started in 1946, not long after Kennedy was elected to Congress and returned from World War II. At the time, Jean was trying to juggle motherhood, heartbreak, and celebrity while being divorced from her husband, Oleg Cassini. Mutual contacts in the frequently overlapping political and Hollywood circles introduced them. Kennedy was youthful, gregarious, and driven. Jean, who was still emotionally healing, took solace in his charm. They grew close in silence. There were a few public appearances, lengthy talks, and dinners. Insiders saw that it wasn't a tabloid frenzy. Their connection reportedly became serious. Marriage rumors circulated. Jean identified as Catholic. Kennedy was, too. However, there was an issue. She had a divorce. His political advisors weren't overly excited either. A man vying for the White House didn't exactly have a pristine public image when he married a divorced Hollywood actress. Kennedy ended the connection in a courteous but obvious manner. Gone never mentioned him negatively, but she was sad. She mentioned a man in her memoir who ended things because of goals that went beyond happiness. Most readers knew who she was referring to. Gone had moved on, at least in public, by 1960, when JFK was elected president. After leaving Hollywood for a more tranquil existence in Texas, she finally got married again. In the early 1960s, the media made another attempt to connect them, but the rumors were merely rehashed from earlier years. No hidden second chapter, no late-night trips to the White House, no rekindling. Return in Consent and Advise. After being out of the spotlight for years, Jean Tierney made a comeback in 1962 in the political drama Advise and Consent, which was helmed by Otto Preminger, who had previously directed her in Laura. This was not a glamorous position. With calm demeanor and measured speech, she portrayed the composed spouse of a senator. However, that was the main objective. Jean's tale was known to Preminger. He gave her the part as a statement as well as a result of her talent. She was still a good fit for the screen. The movie itself was daring, addressing topics like government secrets, extortion, and even scandals. Jean was able to compete with giants like Charles Hilton and Henry Fonda. Critics took note. They commended her confidence, her control, and her refusal to overplay a role that could have been easily forgotten. Her moments gave a sense of real-world dignity, according to the New York Times. But performance wasn't the only factor in Jean's comeback. It was a matter of survival. She had endured family alienation, a divorce, a public mental health battle, and the harsh criticism of a field that denied women over 40-second chances. She wasn't there to show that she was still attractive. She was there to demonstrate that she was still alive. She made a few more appearances after being advised and given permission. Not much, just a few roles. The fame was no longer necessary for her. She had experienced both the good and the horrible. Jean discreetly stopped making movies around the middle of the 1960s. She stayed away from Hollywood drama, got married again, and resided in Houston for a period. She visited her daughter, organized charitable activities, and avoided the spotlight. For viewers of Advise and Consent, however, that brief reappearance was more than just a cameo. On her own terms, she quietly reclaimed her career. Memoir that reveals secrets. Jean Tierney performed something that most iconic Hollywood stars would never do in 1979. She was honest. Her autobiography, Self-Portrait, was published without the typical spin or glitzy photos. It was brutal, honest, and heartbreaking. She didn't start with her red carpet appearances or movie roles. Daria was her opening choice. She described the birth problems, the rubella exposure, and the ensuing years of remorse. She talked about the shock treatment, the breakdowns, and the embarrassment of losing control in front of others. People believe that a breakdown is happening, she wrote. Sometimes it simply becomes numb. The studio structure was criticized by her for treating actors like property. She gave precise yet unambiguous names. She acknowledged that she had considered suicide at one point. She did not exalt it. She didn't make it dramatic. She simply stated it clearly and went on. Most unexpectedly, she didn't sound resentful. She spoke in a quiet, even voice. She compared celebrity to a mirror that never reflects reality. She made a joke about therapy and characterized psychiatrists in the same courteous but stinging way that others disparage lousy filmmakers. The readers were taken aback. They believed they knew Gene Tierney, but this was not him. This was neither Heaven Can Wait nor Laura. The book became a quiet hit because of this woman, who had been loved, harmed, institutionalized, and disregarded, yet still had the guts to declare, "Here's what really happened." Although it didn't reach the top of bestseller lists, readers continued to read it. It was regarded by film historians as one of the most truthful books to emerge from Hollywood's golden age. Young actors read it to learn the true costs of the business. Fans didn't get the version of Gene Tierney they were hoping for. She told them the truth, and in some way that made her once again unforgettable. In Hollywood, she wasn't the most well-known figure. She nearly declined the role, in fact. Nobody anticipated that the low-budget movie would be a success. Then came the scene that made all the difference. How did a woman who wasn't Columbia Pictures' first pick surpass the most popular guys in Hollywood? What had brought her to this point? What makes it one of the most recognizable performances in movie history? The unexpected celebrity. Music: Norma Shearer, Joan Crawford, and Greta Garbo were among the most well-known female actresses in Hollywood in the early 1930s. The height of MGM glitz was embodied by these ladies. However, Claudette Colbert was far from controlling the debate, even though, let's say, she was regarded in her own right. Not quite yet. Claudette's story is different from most Hollywood stories, nevertheless. She didn't strive for insignificant, unappreciative roles, and she didn't have a difficult beginning. Originally named Émilie Claudette Chouan, she was born in France in 1903. She was raised in a cozy middle-class environment after moving to New York as a young girl. She obviously had everything she needed and didn't come from a low-income family. What role did acting play, then? Well, this was not Claudette's idea. She had always dreamed of being a painter. She had no aspirations of becoming a star on stage, much less the silver screen. However, as you can expect, things altered over time. Like many other Hollywood backstories, Claudette somewhat unintentionally found herself lured to performing. However, she was certain that she wanted to continue doing this for the rest of her life. Before enrolling in acting school, she continued her education at the Art Students League in New York. She didn't consider herself the best performer or the next big thing. At this point, she just started acting because it sounded fascinating and engaging. She started to consider Broadway as a destination at this point rather than just the gilded streets of Hollywood. She believed that her only dream was to play on stage. But destiny had other ideas. Inside the past-due 1920s, there was a big shift inside the film industry. The audiences were uninterested in the normal actors they were exposed to, and that they wanted extra. So, producers and studios have been determined for sparkling actors with level performance revel in. And much like that, education meets possibility. And Colbert, together with her refined dictionary, fit the invoice. She signed a contract with Paramount in 1928. But even then, movie was not anything more than a paycheck, a manner to complement her theater paintings. Hollywood to her was a brief prevent, now not the destination. She won't have been in love with Hollywood, however Hollywood changed into certainly in love together with her. So no matter her reluctance, she found consistent work in the film industry. Via the early 1930s, she changed into nicely appeared. A acquainted face on the display screen, but no longer quite a marquee call. Paramount slotted her into a particular type, fashionable, poised, state-of-the-art, and so every position she turned into forged for was as socialites, aristocrats, and the occasional femme deadly, however hardly ever because the main female in a excessive profile challenge. Comedy, as an example, wasn't what she turned into recognized for. The studio saw her as delicate, wise, and dramatic. At the time, Hollywood's inflexible studio system dictated who became a celebrity and who remained simply another running actor. The most important names were tied to powerhouse studios like MGM, Warner Brothers, and Paramount, and every had their very own roster of cautiously groomed stars. MGM turned into the pinnacle, domestic to the largest female icons, even as Warner Brothers became grittier and more rapid-talking. Paramount, where Colbert turned into signed, had a reputation for class, but wasn't pushing her as certainly one of their elite leading ladies. She turned into reputable, employed, and a hit. However, she wasn't a sensation. But in case you're thinking how she in the end had become a sensation, it became in the most unlikely situations ever. It would not come through a role carefully crafted for her. Nor wouldn't it be in the sort of excessive profile drama that studios constructed round their largest stars. Instead, it might come in a film that no person desired with a component she almost became down. The film no one wanted. Now, to apprehend the origins of this movie, you must get the power play in Hollywood at the time. You see, back then, Hollywood changed into a well-oiled system, churning out films at an business pace with the most important studios, MGM, Warner Brothers, and Paramount, preserving all the strength. Then again, Columbia Photos turned into not precisely part of that elite club. It became a smaller studio and frequently disregarded as a poverty row operation. They became out low-finances films that rarely made a lasting impact. Then this small low-budget studio wanted to position out, but another movie called It Befell One Night Time. Really, no person turned into anticipating anything much from it. It wasn't presupposed to be unique or smash any milestones. It had no A-list actors, or even the director, Frank Capra, become just seeking to make a call for himself at the time. The script, based totally on a quick tale referred to as Nighttime Bus, were floating round Hollywood, failing to generate much enthusiasm. It became purported to be a simple, mild-hearted road trip romance. Hardly ever the sort of movie that studios taken into consideration vital. Nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-toes pole. The position of Ellie Andrews, the spoiled Aries on the run, were presented to numerous leading women, however none of them wanted it. Maui, recognized for her wit and beauty, turned it down, calling it below her. Constance Bennett, any other most important celebrity, rejected it as properly. Even B. Davis had no hobby. No person noticed it as a prestigious venture. And with Columbia's reputation for lower finances productions, it wasn't precisely the kind of film actresses have been scrambling to be in. After which the position become offered to our very personal Claudette Colbert. And nicely, she too wasn't involved both. She had just completed a grueling shoot and turned into eager to take a vacation. Whilst the role became presented to her, she disregarded it outright, reportedly saying the script turned into stupid. Columbia wasn't her studio, and he or she had no desire to take on what seemed like a second-price mission. But Kappa, the director, went on to persuade her she become the precise preference. He could now not take no for an answer. He saved pushing and being steady. Eventually, Colbert caved, but she made a deal. She might do the film, but only if she changed into paid double her normal salary. And if production wrapped within 4 weeks. She wanted to be out as speedy as possible back to her planned experience, and she wasn't genuinely anticipating the studio to agree, but they did. And much like that, she changed into locked in. Little did she realize that this so-known as minor task could exchange the direction of her career forever. The scene that modified everything. During the filming of it took place one night time, matters have been rushed and coffee budget. Basic, it wasn't an entirely spectacular production, but one scene in particular stood out and have become one of the finest scenes inside the records of Hollywood, the hitchhiking scene. Interestingly sufficient, it turned into a deceptively easy setup. Ellie Andrews and Peter's struggle have been two not-going traveling partners and are stranded on the aspect of the road, determined to catch a journey. Peter, ever the cocky recognize-it-all, insists there's a right technique to hitchhiking. He demonstrates with a chain of exaggerated gestures, every one failing more embarrassingly than the final. In the meantime, Ellie, looking with amused skepticism, finally steps in and he or she does the most unbelievable component. Without a phrase, she lifts her skirt simply enough to reveal her naked leg. And much like that, inside seconds, a vehicle screeches to a halt. What makes the scene painting so well isn't just the humor and the apparent sexiness. It's also the connection among Colbert and Gable. She isn't only playing the lovely, flirtatious woman, the use of her seems to get what she desires. She's additionally effects on top of things, turning the instant into a masterclass in comedic timing. Her expression, half of smug, one half innocent, tells us everything. She knows exactly what she's doing, and she or he's taking part in watching Peter squirm. It's one of those uncommon moments in romantic comedies in which the lady is not just reacting to the person's antics, she's outsmarting him. What makes it even extra fascinating is the tension behind the scenes. Most people find it hard to accept as true with that Colbert turned into reportedly reluctant to do the leg-bearing second at all. She taken into consideration it too risque and initially refused, forcing Capra to scramble for an answer. The director even employed a body double to carry out the scene. However, while Colbert noticed the stand-in's legs, she scoffed, declaring that hers looked higher. In the end, she did it herself, however that preliminary hesitation worked in her favor. The scene does not stumble upon as pressured or overly suggestive. As an alternative, it feels natural, playful, and perfectly in step with her person's blend of sophistication and rebellion. After which there was Gable gambling the appropriate instantly guy. He doesn't overreact or turn the instant into slapstick. As a substitute, his diffused frustration, his barely wounded ego, and his wordless resignation make Colbert's performance shine even more. The stability between them, her convenient attraction, and his exasperated masculinity, made the scene and the movie an on-the-spot classic. The glorious aftermath. Whilst the film in the end hit theaters, critics and audiences had been stunned with the aid of the sudden superstar power that emerged from what they assumed would be a popular romantic comedy. Clark Gable's rugged attraction had lengthy been the draw. But it turned into Colbert's subtle humor and magnetic presence that quietly upstaged him, transforming her performance into the film's most talked-about moment. However, even the visitors had a pleasant enjoy with the film. They found themselves giggling on the antics on screen and on the delightful twist of fate that noticed this refined actress become the unexpected heroine of the tale. And similar to that, glowing reviews started out pouring in from every nook. Newspapers, magazines, or even informal chatter among movie-goers praised her because the revelation of the 12 months. It turned into as if she had cast an enchanting spell over the target audience, eclipsing the male lead together with her wit, poise, and that irresistible appeal that made every gesture memorable. In a single sweeping stroke, she challenged the very concept of stardom, prompting even the most skeptical critics to reconsider the set-up order of Hollywood's main women. As is Hollywood's nature, with a top-notch performance comes top-notch accolades and recognition. The film's triumph on the Academy Awards simply solidified this newfound popularity. As it befell one night swept the major classes, Colbert's overall performance had become emblematic of a moving tide within the enterprise. A motion in which talent and authenticity began to outweigh the conventional markers of star power. This second of recognition was now not just an accolade. It became a turning point that multiplied her career to heights formerly reserved for the era's most celebrated names. Unexpectedly, she changed into now not seen as simply an assisting presence in a male-dominated panorama, but as a critical figure whose paintings resonated on every level. This surge in reputation ushered Claudette Colbert into the elite circles of Hollywood. Roles that when appeared out of reach have become part of her repertoire, and the styles of characters she portrayed grew richer, extra nuanced, and decidedly more difficult. Not turned into she the reliable, refined actress of the beyond. She was now a trailblazer, paving the way for a new kind of leading girl who should stability humor with sophistication and vulnerability with electricity. Because the echoes of that transformative performance continued to reshape her career, one couldn't help however marvel what bold alternatives and clean narratives awaited her next in the ever-evolving world of cinema. More than only a scene, Claudette Colbert's performance in It Came About One Night Time did more than just change her career. It changed the manner Hollywood idea about leading girls in romantic comedies. Permit spoil that down. Earlier than this, lady characters within the genre often match into inflexible categories. It turned into both the demure love interest, the glamorous however distant socialite, or the ditzy comedic sidekick. However, after the film, It Took Place One Night, Colbert completely shattered those expectancies by way of embodying something a bit extra one of a kind. A girl who changed into witty, stylish, playful, and undeniably in control of her very own story. While she portrayed Ellie Andrews, she set a new widespread. A popular that said she wasn't there to simply react and praise the male lead like every other film earlier than that point, however she was an same force within the film. Someone to be taken similarly significantly and capable of bringing her personal strength. She was very state-of-the-art, however wasn't also above getting her arms grimy, whether it was dunking a donut with exaggerated precision, handing over sharp comebacks, or cheekily outsmarting Peter at his own sport. She turned into assured but vulnerable, independent yet romantic, and most significantly, constantly thrilling to watch. This stability combined attraction with intelligence, sensuality with humor, became the blueprint for romantic comedy heroines for decades to return. You could see sunglasses of Colbert's Ellie in actresses like Katharine Hepburn, Rosalind Russell, or even later stars like Julia Roberts or Meg Ryan. The idea of the cool, assured, and smart leading woman owes a lot to what Colbert perfected in that unmarried performance. Notwithstanding her many different achievements in Hollywood, her work in Nighttime, The Palm Seaside Story, and Since You Went Away, nothing pretty eclipsed what she did in It Took Place One Night. It stays the instant that defines her legacy, the film that became her from a respected actress into a cinematic icon. While Hollywood advanced and new stars emerged, her impact at the romantic comedy genre by no means faded. Many years later, whilst audiences' appearance lower back on the golden age of Hollywood, Colbert's hitchhiking scene, her sharp banter with Gable, and her easy blend of humor and class nonetheless stand as some of the most memorable moments in film records. And in that manner, It Befell One Night Time wasn't simply her breakthrough. It was her immortality. What came next with It happened one night, turning Claudette Colbert into one in every of Hollywood's most bankable stars in a single day. She all at once had something that she by no means had earlier than strength. All of a surprising, she was not only a reputable actress. She changed into now a full-fledged main lady with the ability to choose her roles greater carefully and negotiate better offers. And in contrast to many stars who get TYP solid after a breakout performance, Colbert refused to be boxed in. After her performance, you'll assume she will now completely stick with comedy romance movies, however that became the definition of TYP casting, and she wanted no element in that. So rather than certainly coasting at the fulfillment of screwball comedy, she used her newfound repute to explore a range of genres. Admittedly, she did keep making romantic comedies, a lot of which became classics. She also took on dramatic roles, duration pieces, and even wartime movies. Her following couple of years have been a masterclass in versatility, proving that her allure and talent should enlarge a long way beyond fast-speaking heiresses and road trip romance. After a successful movie, there is often a special bond among the actors and the administrators, and this one changed into no unique. She quickly reunited with director Frank Capra in Broadway Invoice in 1934, a comedy drama approximately horse racing, which wasn't as massive as It Passed Off One Night Time, however reaffirmed her place within the industry. And then got here The Gilded Lily in 1935. With that, she cast away all doubts that she became the rom-com queen. Soon sufficient, audiences eagerly embraced her state-of-the-art yet playful method to like memories. For every other actress, this would be sufficient. She had accomplished her quality, and it'd be time to stay where she became. However, now not this time. She wasn't content material to just stay in just one lane. So, in 1934, she stepped into the shoes of the Egyptian queen in Cleopatra. And with that, she proved to anyone that she may want to carry an epic historical drama as convincingly as a light-hearted comedy. And make no mistake, this was no easy feat. Whilst the film may not be as broadly remembered today as later versions of Cleopatra, it was a major fulfillment on the time and showcased her ability to transform into larger-than-life lifestyles roles. At some point of the overdue 1930s and 1940s, Colbert continued to stability glamour with depth, starring in movies like Midnight in 1939, an underrated romantic comedy that stays a fan favorite, and The Palm Seashore Story in 1942, a screwball masterpiece that solidified her reputation as one of the genre's finest leading ladies. However, she didn't pull away from critical paintings both. Her performance in Since You Went Away in 1944 became a film about a World War II drama, and it earned her an Oscar nomination and showed audiences an extra susceptible, emotional side to her acting. Unlike a number of her contemporaries, Colbert controlled to preserve her superstar popularity for years, carefully selecting roles that performed to her strengths whilst additionally allowing for evolution. She did not fade away or burn out. Rather, she adapted. By the point Hollywood's golden age began to shift within the 1950s, Colbert had already built a frame of labor that ensured her area the various greats. And yet, in spite of all her achievement, nothing ever quite matched the cultural impact of It Occurred One Night. It remained the defining moment of her profession, the overall performance that secured her an area in film records. But as opposed to being limited through it, she used it as a launching pad, proving time and again that she was extra than only a one-hit surprise. Away from the cameras. In relation to Claudette Collard's love life and private relationships, they have been anything but simple. In 1928, she married actor and director Norman Foster, her co-star in the Broadway play The Barker. But their marriage was kept secret for years, and that they failed to even stay collectively. Rather, in L.A., Colbert shared a domestic along with her mom, Jean, who reportedly couldn't stand Foster and wouldn't even let him inside the residence. Unsurprisingly, the marriage did not last. They divorced in Mexico in 1935. However, that turned into now not the quit of love for Colbert. Later that identical year on Christmas Eve, Colbert fell in love again and married Dr. Joel Pressman in Yuma, Arizona. He was a respected healthcare professional who might move on to end up a professor and the top of UCLA Scientific College's head and neck surgical procedure branch. There has been no doubt that Colbert surely cherished him and could do whatever for him. She even gave him a Beechcraft airplane as a gift. The two went directly to settle right into a secure life together, shopping for a ranch in Northern California, where Colbert spent her time horseback driving even as Pressman raised show livestock. She had a flavor for first-rate things, driving round in a Lincoln Continental and a Ford Thunderbird. For the first time in a long term, Colbert turned into satisfied, and in contrast to her first marriage, this one lasted for some time, 33 years to be exact. But lamentably, her fairy tale got here to an end when Pressman exceeded away from liver cancer in 1968. Now all she had was her mother, and that courting wasn't, having said that, superb. You see, her mother, Jean, turned into complicated. Jean changed into recognized to be tough, reportedly favoring Colbert's brother, Charles, over her. Charles, who went with the aid of the surname Wendling, taken from their grandmother. He acted as Colbert's business manager for a time and was accountable for negotiating a number of her quality Hollywood contracts inside the late 1930s and early 40s. In 1942, he enlisted in Global Battle II. Inside the mid-50s, Colbert eventually decided to take a step away from Hollywood. Yet, she maintained an extravagant way of life. She had a weekend residence in Palm Springs. And consistent with a marketing government, he had this to mention. Claudette turned into extravagant. I never ever noticed her question the fee of whatever. She owned a beautiful Lloyd Wright designed domestic in Holby Hills, but later offered it in 1963. She and Pressman then rented a smaller house in Beverly Hills. However, after Pressman's dying, she concepted become the stop for her until in 1958 she met Vera Hull, a rich painter and photographer who came about to be the stepdaughter of a Sears Roebuck eyes. The two have been close pals for almost a decade, traveling together, sharing an interest in artwork, or even renting matching penis in Big Apple. When Colbert offered a domestic in Barbados in the early 1960s, Hull sold the residence round the corner. Naturally, rumors swirled about their courting, but Colbert denied anything romantic. Their friendship sooner or later fell aside after a dramatic argument even as Pressman changed into dying. Hull reportedly claimed that he could as an alternative take Colbert's existence and his personal than bypass away on my own. That marked the stop in their friendship forever, and Colbert ended up living her life far away from the highlight.